on this computer. There it is. Okay, cool. So review session number 2. What questions are unanswered from Friday? Quick start.
Can you go over the questions on the basic functions of vitamins and minerals?
Sure. So your vitamins and minerals are mostly going to be your matching and then multiple choice true false. So there's not going to be really anything from a short answer perspective. They're kind of interspersed throughout. There are certain vitamins and minerals that I emphasize more than others. So your B6, B12, folate, I believe I put more emphasis on. Some of the ones that are more, um, I guess, deficient. So like vitamin D, iron for a lot of people tend to be they tend to be deficient in iron, things like that. Um, for the fat soluble vitamins, I would definitely know all of those and their general functions. Maybe some minor things about some of them. So deficiency symptoms for vitamin D, for instance. So like rickets versus osteoporosis in kids versus adults. What vitamin D does, it helps regulate blood calcium. You should know that calcium is the most abundant mineral in your body. You should know what the electrolytes are, sodium, potassium, chloride, what their major functions are. Functions of water, right? So temperature control, excretion, pH balance, um, like lubrication of joints, things like that. Do you need to know all the vitamin deficiencies? Absolutely not. Just the ones that I kind of highlighted because they tend to be a little bit more prevalent, right? So like vitamin D, for instance, was one that's pretty prevalent. I do have a little bit of information that I think is easier for y'all to stick when you heard it. So for instance, like the vitamin A thing, you should know that vitamin A, the function of it relates to vision, cell division, replication. But too much vitamin A, especially if you ate like a polar bear liver, would kill you, right? Um, for B vitamins, I wouldn't focus a whole lot on like their specific functions. I mentioned B9, which is folate, B12, and B6. Just know their general functions that I highlighted because they all kind of tie in together with the methylation reactions and the significance of a lot of the chemical components that are created from that, like DNA methylation for gene expression, creatine production, melatonin production, epinephrine synthesis, things like that. What do you need to know about adenylate kinase? Lemma asks. You don't need to know anything about it. If it is anything, it might be your extra credit question. And basically, all it is two ADPs, adenosine diphosphates, and then all you're doing is moving one of the phosphates over, right? So you have 3 and 1 instead of 2 and 2. It's kind of like I think that learning what adenylate kinase does is pretty similar to learning what the creatine phosphate reaction is. It's because essentially when you're burning through energy, you have ADP. You also have a creatine phosphate. All you're doing is lending that phosphate over to remake ATP. Michael asks, can you resubmit previous assignments for a higher grade? Yeah, you just have until Wednesday to do that if you want to before you take your exam, and you have to highlight the changes. So that way I don't have to reread through your entire assignment document. I don't like advertise that at the beginning of class because otherwise everyone would just forget any due dates. And what I don't want is for people to kind of put in a half, how do I say this? Subpar effort. I want to hear subpar effort. Since it's a YouTube video, I don't want to say any bad words. So I don't want any subpar effort on those assignments, and then forcing you to just kind of redo them over and over and having to reread your papers over and over again. So yeah, you can resubmit things until Wednesday when you take your exam, but I won't take anything after that. And I also won't read it unless you highlight what you changed so I can make those comparisons more easily. Alexa asks if our exams will be at the normal class time. Yep. So if you were the 10 p.m., your exam is 10 or 10 p.m., 10 a.m., then your class is your finals at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. If you're the 2 o'clock class, then your final's 2 o'clock on that Wednesday. You don't need a calculator. The format's pretty much exactly the same. The only difference is I think there's maybe a couple more questions at most.
Do we need to know the deficiencies of minerals?
Iron is probably one that I would be aware of. Calcium ties into vitamin D quite a bit. So I would probably know that calcium is also related to rickets and osteoporosis. Let's see. You should know vitamin K deficiency, folate deficiency. What was your question again, Kylie, through Fernando's thing?
It was, do we need to know the deficiencies of minerals?
The deficiencies of minerals. Other ones
Yeah.
that I just mentioned, I wouldn't focus too much on it, no.
Okay, sweet, thank you.
Unless you want to, that's fine. There are those terms that I mentioned though, like hypo versus hyperkalemia, natremia. I would probably know those. I have some repeat questions from the first exam, especially ones that people get wrong pretty often. So like the whole is unprocessed food always better than processed food? And the key term there is always, right? So when you start looking at absolutes, that's when things start to get a little bit murky, right? Because there's all these contextual factors. More questions? Oh, got okay. So Bella asks, can I elaborate on what I'm looking for when asking about general consumption principles and AMDR, general understanding of proportions and ranges? Yeah. So you should know that AMDR, it's AMDR, acceptable macronutrient distribution range. It's the percentages that are recommended for everyone to be consuming carbs, fats, and proteins. The main thing that I want you to know, especially from one of the questions you had in exam one, is that the highest range, so the largest variation between the highest or the lowest and the highest number was for protein. And that's mostly due to contextual factors like activity, or if you're pregnant, or you have like burns or something like that, your protein needs increase because it helps with the protein turnover. So understanding the protein is very contextual, which is why it has the largest range. The percentage of carbohydrates is overall the largest absolute percentage, so the numbers are highest. And the reason for that is because if you look at your MyPlate, everything in there can be a constituent of carbohydrate, or carbohydrate can be a constituent of it. So if we're requiring, several cups of vegetables and fruits, those are primarily carbohydrates. Same things with grains, regardless of whether they're whole grains or refined grains. And in most cases, dairy, just a little bit of cheese is going to do it. Milk does contain carbohydrate. Even some sources of protein, like lentils, for instance, will have protein. Soy will have, lentils and soy will have carbohydrate in them, not just protein. So fat's pretty consistent. Protein has the highest range, and then carbohydrate has the largest absolute value.
On one part of the study guide, you have sodium and potassium specific AI amounts, and then the other part of it, it's electrolyte RDA amounts for sodium and potassium. Are those the same thing?
Yeah, those are the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is 2,300 and 4,700.
Yep, 2,300 for sodium, 4,700 for potassium. More questions?
What are non-recommended sports supplements besides anabolic steroids?
Non-recommended ones. I think it's easier just to remember the recommended ones. So creatine. I don't even think I have a question about beta alanine in there. What do I have in here? Yeah, I feel like your better bet is just knowing if you can identify which things are illegal drugs and which things are supplements, you should be fine. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps. I just last session you said to focus on the ones that are illegal. So I didn't know.
I'm going to tell you it's a multiple choice question, and I might be asking you which of the following is like demonstrated to be effective but also legal or something like that.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Nadia asked who has higher. Oh, Ashley asked first. My bad. Ashley asked, then Nadia, then Katie. So Ashley asked, can I explain the breakdown and breakdown of the term hypercalcemia? Yeah, so hyper, the prefix that means more than or like a large amount of. So hyper is more, calcemia, the calc part is calcium, and then emia is a suffix that means blood. So hypercalcemia literally would translate to high blood calcium. Um, Hypernatremia, high blood sodium. And if you change that around, you have hypocalcemia, low blood calcium. So it's just a mixture of these, knowing that hyper means high, hypo, HYPO means low, and then the emia is blood. It's pretty much whatever is in the middle of that word, the base word, which defines what the particular compound is that you're looking at. Like for instance, hypercholesterolemia, if you've ever heard of that before, high blood cholesterol, right? That one's not very clever. Hyperglycemia, or large amounts of blood sugar or blood glucose.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nadia asks who has higher iron requirements. So females have higher iron requirements than males, and then even within females, pregnant and lactating women have higher iron requirements than just menstruating women. But it kind of works in that order of magnitude. Males, females, and then females with specific needs like pregnancy and lactation. I mean, it's athletes also need more iron. People who are iron deficient obviously need more iron. I'm not going to quiz you on that, but I mean, that's just, I feel responsible for making sure that I mention that too, since I'm being recorded.
Do we need to know the definition of a coenzyme?
By need, do you mean is it on the exam?
That would be correct.
Technically, yes. Something that helps the metabolic reaction or helps the enzyme work, right? A coenzyme is like the enzyme's partner, right? Is there a specific question about it? No. Does the word come up? Yes. So you should know what the meaning of it is. Is that helpful?
Yes, it's helpful.
Cool. Okie dokie. Let's see. Katie asks, for the major and trace minerals, do you just need to know the amounts? I'm not going to ask you specific amounts unless I specify it. So like I ask you specific amounts of sodium and potassium, but I'm not going to ask you about how much you need of iron and how much you need of calcium and whatnot. I kind of just want you to know like the relative amounts for those that are more general. So like iron, like we just talked about, I think it was Nadia's question, right? Who needs more iron? Or like calcium, it's the mineral that's the largest, makes up the largest proportion in the body. It also is it's related to vitamin D and all that stuff. So not like super huge amounts of detail related to specific numerical values unless I specified, like I did with sodium and potassium. I think the major thing is just knowing major minerals you need in larger amounts than trace minerals. Also, can I go over retinoids and carotenoids, beta carotene? Yeah, absolutely. So both are vitamin A. Retinoids and carotenoids are both vitamin A. Carotenoids are the pre-form of vitamin A, so they actually get converted into vitamin A retinoids. But they both serve kind of different functions. So retinoids largely play a role in vision, cell division, proliferation, which is why they play a role in the whole bright light shining into your eyes and help resynthesizing that pigment called rhodopsin to allow you to see again at night. And they also play a role in, like, if a pregnant female takes too much vitamin A, it could potentially cause like a mutation or some kind of like consequential event that could lead to like an early miscarriage or something like that. And then for beta carotene, it does play a different role, like I mentioned. The retinoids are generally found in animals, but carotenoids are generally found in plants. Beta carotene specifically has a very specific pigment associated with it. So like the orange, yellow kind of colors, sweet potatoes, GMO golden rice, if you're familiar with that, is basically rice that was engineered to have vitamin A in it, specifically beta carotene. And the main function of beta carotene is as a lipid-based antioxidant. So because it's a fat-soluble vitamin, it exists on the interior of the membrane. So it helps scavenge free radicals on the interior of the membrane. And that's in contrast to vitamin E, which is on the border of the membrane, and vitamin C, which is in your liquid portion. So that would be in the extracellular fluid outside the cell, as well as the intracellular fluid inside the cell. That answer the question, Katie?
Can you go over creatine monohydrate function specific metabolic reaction?
Totally, yeah. Do I want to type it? Do I want to just say it? I'll say it because you probably can't hear you wouldn't be able to see the chat on the video itself. So let me clarify Katie's question real quick. So beta carotene is just inside the membrane. Yes, it's an antioxidant inside the membrane. Vitamin E, vitamin A, specifically vitamin A in the form of beta carotene, are both antioxidants that work to prevent the membrane from being exposed to free radicals. To Fernando's question, the creatine reaction is catalyzed by creatine kinase, and the way that it works is when ATP is broken down, you end up with ADP, or adenosine diphosphate, two phosphates. You have creatine phosphate that's stored in the muscle, which is one phosphate. It's creatine bound to one phosphate molecule. So all you do is, through that reaction that is happening because of creatine kinase, the phosphate group is lent over to the adenosine diphosphate to then recreate ATP. What you're left with after that is just a leftover creatine molecule that doesn't have a phosphate bound to it anymore. When you stop doing whatever the intense activity is, you have that, I suppose, extra ATP, and that phosphate will move from the ATP back over to the creatine phosphate to help you now have the creatine phosphate as storage, essentially, for future activities where energy requirements are higher. So the main things knowing is that on one side you have ADP and creatine phosphate. On the other side, we have ATP and creatine. It's a simple numbers game of just switching the phosphates back and forth to be able to have as much ATP as possible. And that reaction goes in both directions and is catalyzed by the enzyme creatine kinase, or CK for short. Sound good?
Got that. Yeah,
Cool.
it's the sticks game. I'll just remember that.
It's the sticks game. Yep, you got it.
All right.
I try to break it down to the simplest way possible to remember.
I understand it. Thanks.
Yeah. If you haven't played Sticks, then just gotta. It's like the whole Lord of the Rings thing. You don't get like a quarter of the lecture if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings. So you should probably go watch Lord of the Rings. Maybe that's a good way to study. Ugh. That wasn't a recommendation. What else we got? Fernando and Kylie, you guys studying inside Ocean Hall or writing on the boards?
That's correct. Yes, we are.
Nice, solid.
Can you go over why the ketogenic diet may be appropriate for athletes again? Maybe in a simpler way.
So the ketogenic diet mainly is consuming low carbohydrate, high amounts of fat. There is the relationship where intensity and duration are tied into fuels. So the longer the duration, generally speaking, the lower the intensity. So like an ultra marathon in a second by second playthrough, an ultra marathon is very low intensity, just sustained over an abnormally long duration, hours, right? Um, on the other hand, a sprint is an extremely high intensity, but a very short duration. So you can't do a sprint for much longer than 10, 15, maybe 20 seconds. So essentially, there's the relationship that the longer the activity, the longer the exercise, the lower the duration, the more fat you're going to use, the shorter the exercise and the more intense the exercise, right? It's higher intensity relates to more carbohydrate. And so the ketogenic diet for athletes is probably not going to be optimal because most athletes in some capacity are going to have some form of high intensity type of activity embedded within it. Even if you're, if you're playing a game of soccer, you need higher output energy pathways to be active, like glycolysis, for instance, to be able to do things like kick the ball with any meaningful velocity, make like quick strafing motions and turns, pretty like the quick motions that you would need to try to, like shoot the ball, right? All these different things are really important and require like some degree of power and a lot of force being generated in a short period of time. So carbs are going to be pretty essential for most sports that are out there. The only way that you could possibly manage doing a ketogenic diet and still maintaining optimal performance would probably be if you're doing something like an ultra marathon where the intensity is so low but sustained over such a long duration that you're probably going to be using predominantly fats in the first place. But the issue with that is contextually, I mean, there are some instances if you're doing a trail run or you're at the end of the ultra marathon, you might be trying to push as hard as you can to, beat the other person that you're kind of neck and neck with, or like I mentioned, the trail run, if you have to jump over a log or, make a quick step side to side, and so you don't run into something, right? That's going to be really important to have access to those higher yield energy pathways. Or when I say yield, I mean they produce that energy faster. So that was kind of like a question that embedded the energy pathways and the crossover concept and the ketogenic diet call it kind of all into one. And that's kind of what I was going for, is I want you to be able to take the concept and also connect it into something practical that we see, like the ketogenic diet and why it's so inappropriate for athletes for the most part. Was that helpful or was that convoluted?
It was helpful. It was quite a lot though.
Indeed it is.
It's okay. It's okay.
Indeed it is. If you break it down what the ketogenic diet is, and you look at the figure that has the different energy pathways in it, it'll start to make sense in that activities have a very specific requirement for how much variability there is in the sport. Like even something like combat sports, yeah, you can. A part of combat sports is how many rounds you can last. But another big part of that is how fast can you like duck? How fast can you like throw a punch, right? How fast or how much force can you generate to get out of like, a locked position or something like that. And all that's very energy dependent, and it's all happening kind of in a very short period of time. So carbohydrates are going to be a really big component of trying to create that energy when you don't necessarily have all this time to get oxygen in to burn it like you would with fat. KDS, not sure if anyone asked, but can you go over the creatine monohydrate function and specific metabolic reaction? Yeah, I'll go over it one more time. So the metabolic function is as an energy source, and I guess I can tie this back into the 3 lines on that figure. The first line is the immediate pathway, or the ATP PCR system, or ATP PC, ATP CP. It has different names depending on what you're talking about. I kind of gravitate towards ATP PCR just because I hear it that way the most often. But basically, it's your energy pathway that predominates for the onset of exercise until about 15 seconds or so is usually what people say, but up to about 20 seconds. And it's a very simple reaction. So it's literally just you have ADP from burning through ATP reserves. The creatine phosphate that's stored in your muscle essentially just moves that phosphate over to ADP to resynthesize or recycle ATP. And that is catalyzed by creatine kinase. And what you're left over with is creatine just by itself until the reaction is reversed and you essentially resynthesize or restore your levels of phosphocreatine. I'm going to draw it in the chat. And by draw, I mean I'm just going to type it out. It's important that you understand the enzyme is CK and that you understand that it's a reversible reaction, which means that it happens in both directions. Oh, there you go. Fernando did it too. Good. Nice. Solid. So the way that you can think about creatine, even supplementation, is kind of the same way that people would eat carbohydrates before they have some type of exercise. It just acts as another storage depot for energy. It's just that it's a much more limited fuel source because you can only store a pretty minuscule amount of creatine phosphate in the muscle. Even with supplementation, you can increase stores by like 40%. That's still not all that much, relatively speaking, but your stores of carbohydrate, they can grow with as much muscle mass as you have, and the liver can store a finite amount as well. And then, as we probably well know, fat distribution means that we can pretty much store as much energy as we need in the form of fat. More questions?
Yes. The fill in the blank about iron, where basically need to know like Fe2 versus Fe3, which like iron, heme iron, and non-heme iron.
Yeah, got it. So Fe2 is your ferrous iron. That is your heme iron. That is the better, more bioavailable source because it generally is found in animals. Let's see. I'm going to write that out. Ferrous, heme, animal sources. And then your ferric iron is Fe3+. That's non-heme. And that is usually plant sources, not as well absorbed. I'm going to write less bioavailable. And heme iron is more bioavailable. If you remember what I said in class, the way that I remember it is Fe2+. If you want to, you have the conventional dating patterns, 2 people usually better than 3. 3 is a third wheel. 2 is us. 2 is great. 3 is not good. 3 is icky. Ferric iron. Ferrous iron. Whatever helps you remember it, right? I think that covers everything. Yeah, for iron. You should also know just like the general functions of iron relating to oxygen carrying capacity because it plays a role as the center of hemoglobin. What else we got? Yeah, not yeah, Calvin Klein, CK, creatine kinase. Good. Or are you just saying that you have Calvin Klein like products? That's cool. Big George brand person myself, you know. Walmart brand. Another 18 minutes. Yeah, Ashley.
So for the short question, I have like 4 written down. It was the keto diet in athletes, the drawing of that thing you just did.
Yes.
What else? Then we have that question you still haven't decided that based on the other exams, like the fruit one or the.
Oh, I've decided already. I just don't want
Oh,
to necessarily tell you.
oh, okay. Dang. Okay.
I want you to be prepared for it. I am viewing Daniela's screen is being shared. That's nice.
Oh, okay. I thought that was me. I was trying to freak out. I was like,
All good. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Um, that's interesting to know that anyone can share their screen. That's nice though. Um, what other? So the fruit question, like whether fruit sugar is, better for you, not better for you. The alcohol question, I believe, is on there. So the red wine question and the compound.
Oh, I have a question about that too.
Which one? Oh,
The roles with the red blood cells and the methylation reactions.
yeah, the methylation reaction. Yeah, sure. The folate thing. Oh, is that you just generally wanted me to talk about it?
The folate thing.
Okay. Folate, B12, B6, they all work together to help. Well, basically B12 and B6 are like the guitarist and the drummer for folate. So they are essential in making methylation reactions happen, essential for making the music happen. But folate is the lead singer, right? It's the Haley Williams of Paramore or um, uh, the Freddie in Queen, right? So Freddie Mercury and Queen. So essentially what they do is they help with creating the precursors or like the base materials for DNA. So if you don't have enough of those three, what can happen is you end up with anemia. Folate's even a little bit more important. If you don't have enough folate, what can happen is that you end up with spina bifida if you're a pregnant female and the child that you have, which can result in either massive disability or potentially death. Folate also plays a role, or all three of them play a role in helping to create S-adenosylmethionine, which if you just remember SAM, S-A-M, that is what lends these little methyl groups, which are just these little carbons with hydrogens attached to them. And this methylation reaction is really important because it happens in a lot of different metabolic reactions to create things that we need in order for normal physiological function to happen, like epinephrine, melatonin production. Creatine is actually created with methylation reactions, DNA expression, right? So using those methyl groups on the actual DNA itself can either cover the DNA to suppress the gene, or methylation reactions can happen in the opposite direction, removing methyl groups from different genes and then allowing them to become even more expressed. So like resistance training would uncover genes related to muscle building and cover up genes related to breaking down muscle, because ultimately people think of resistance training as something that helps build up muscle and not something that breaks it down. Did that help? Yes.
Yes.
Good. Good. Cool. To Ashley's question, let's see. Oh, well, let's see. Michael, I'll get to your question in a second. Katie says, is it B6 or B9? B9 is folate. B6 is pyridoxine phosphate. So that it helps with B9. So B12 and B6 help with B9. You can remember that B9 is folate. I'm never going to ask you. Folate is a B vitamin. It's just that certain B vitamins, they're called by their like B12 or versus other ones like biotin. You don't know it as it's B vitamin form. You just know it as biotin, right? It's B7. But you don't know it that way. So certain ones are just more convenient to say is, oh, this is vitamin B6 instead of saying pyridoxine phosphate. Makes sense, I guess, just from a convenience standpoint. B6 also has that other role for transamination and deamination reactions. It's actually technically the same role as it's having in supporting folate, because a transamination reaction happens in order to make the whole SAM production thing happen. But I don't want to like teach you biochemistry at the same time just to show you the connection there. I think it's easier for the exam's sake to just think that they're all kind of B6, B12, and folate are all related to the same function of helping out folate. B6 also has this relationship that includes, helping with protein metabolism through trans and deaminases. And then, Ashley, you want to know about the other potential questions, yeah?
I just wanted to double check if they were the ones I wrote, but
okay. So ones that are up for you to know for the exam. The other one is that's not from a previous exam is you should understand the results from the Diet Fits trial, the article analysis 3 paper, the Gardner 2018 paper, which was the high fat, low carbohydrate diet versus the low fat, high carbohydrate diet, and the results of that and the general results of that, right? Like it was pretty simple overall. Like everyone got their assignments turned back into them, right? So you should basically know what the results of that study are. I mean, I can talk about them if you want me to, but I think that as long as you can confidently explain the results of that study in a sentence, then I think you should be fine. Yeah, the red wine question, the fruit-derived sugar question, red wine question was from exam 1. The fruit-derived sugar thing was from exam 2, the one we just had. And then another potential one is that flax versus chia seeds, omega-3 versus omega. There's just omega-3. There's no omega-6 in that. Just the flax versus flax chia versus salmon, which is the better form of omega-3. Michael asked about the crossover concept. I briefly talked about it. So it was basically that whole concept of looking at intensity and duration of an exercise and how it transitions from fat to carbohydrate as the intensity gets higher, which is basically the same thing as the duration of the exercise is decreased, right? Because generally speaking, if you're doing the activity to like its normal characteristics, a high intensity type of activity doesn't last very long. Obviously, you can run at a low pace for a short period of time, but generally speaking, like a particular set distance, like a 5K, for instance, is going to be a much more tempered pace. So the intensity is going to be much lower and the duration much longer. Slim asks, what are CAM definitions? So it's complementary alternative medicine. So basically the complementary is trying to use things like nutrition. It doesn't necessarily have to be nutrition. CAM could also be like chiropractic therapy. It could be like dry needling and stuff like that. But from the perspective of nutrition, it's basically using nutrition, supplements, other nutritional strategies, like diet timing and stuff like that to be able to help with a particular Western medicine like approach, right? So an example that I give is if someone ends up getting like stage 1 cancer, right, where it's still very manageable depending on what cell line they have, a lot of the times people are going to choose to either do a surgical option or do some type of chemotherapy, and that would just be the the Western portion of it, but they can do other things like eating a diet that's really rich in antioxidant promoting compounds. They could do like IV vitamin C administration, and that would be the complementary. Now, if that same person had stage 1 cancer and they didn't do the chemotherapy or the surgery option and they just did the vitamin C stuff, that would be the alternative portion of it, right? So they are choosing to not do one in lieu of the other, right? So there's complementary, there's alternative, and it's basically just talking about these different nutritional approaches, or it's not limited to nutritional approaches, but for the sake of this class, just kind of think of it that way, that you would have to standard Western medicine approaches.
For the graph that we have to label about energy, the red line is creatine phosphate, the yellow line is glycolysis, and blue is aerobic system, and then the fuels.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't memorize colors just because.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be black and white, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be black and white, but basically, assuming that the red line is the first one, right? The one on the farthest left, yellow is the one in the middle, and then blue is the longer one, the one that extends out beyond the 2-minute time point, then that would be true.
And then with the fuels, right?
With the fuels, yeah. So the line, and it ties back into the whole duration and intensity thing. So the creatine phosphate or the ATP-CP system or PCR system, it's in that first few seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. And then as that line decreases, something else has to pick up in order to sustain that exercise. So then glycolysis, if you said lactic acid system or lactate system, I'm fine with that too, because the end product of glycolysis, when a relative amount of oxygen is relatively scarce, is going to be lactate. And that's going to predominate as the energy source until about 2 minutes or so. And then beyond that point, leading almost indefinitely would be the aerobic systems, which are going to be utilizing fats and carbohydrates. More questions? Got like 5-ish more minutes, 6 more minutes. Actually, 7 more minutes at 2:53. As a reminder, I'm gonna take the MP4 and then put it up on YouTube, and I'll probably have that available in the next like hour and a half, depending on how long the recording takes to upload. More questions?
Do we have to know the food sources of all of them?
No, for like vitamins and minerals.
Yeah.
Folate you should probably know because it's one that we don't get a whole lot of. So foliage, right? So plants usually, fruits and vegetables for folate, and then the synthetic form of folate is folic acid. You should probably know that that's usually found either in supplemental form or in enriched products, which reminds me that you should know the difference between fortification and enrichment. Fortification is adding things that were not normally there. Enrichment is in the process of extracting nutrients, they add them back in. Other than that, food sources. I mentioned that vitamin A toxicity thing, right? If you eat a polar bear liver. Vitamin K sources, right? You can get vitamin K. You actually make vitamin K in your gut. It's just not enough to be able to sustain you, so you still have to consume it, which is why they give babies a vitamin K shot, because their guts aren't well developed enough at the microbiome to be able to produce them. Yeah, other than that, you should be fine. You don't know that
This
question?
was 50 questions.
It is 45 total questions, but you know, I wouldn't look at all the questions the same because you have 1, 2, 3, 4 short answer. You have 3 fill in the blank. You have 10 or 11 true false. One fill in the blank figure thing, right? The one that I talked about. 1 matching, which has 8 total things you need to match, and then the rest are multiple choice. And the point layout's exactly the same, right? So all the multiple choice are worth 2, all the true false are worth 1. The best bang for your buck is coming from the short answer. I implore you to, like, if you don't know the answer, just like try to BS me as much as you can. Just like show me that you know like something about it, because then I'm much more likely to give you like a sympathy 1 point, right? Like even if you don't know anything about it, don't leave it blank, right? Like the worst thing that could happen is I just don't give you a point, but you have the entire whatever it is 2-hour period to try to BS your way out of the situation if you don't know it. I mean, I guess the best scenario would be just to know everything, right? Because I basically just went over all the questions. So if you can learn everything, you can memorize everything. Not saying it's all just memorization, try to understand everything too. Katie asks for the components of daily energy expenditure and details in that pie chart: thermic effective feeding, physical activity, and resting energy expenditure. Yeah, do I have a question on that in there? Was that in the study guide?
It is in the study guide.
It is, yes. So I would probably just know, if you know that pie chart and you know that they all make up total daily energy expenditure, you know which ones make up the largest degree of energy expenditure, you'll be fine there. Any more?
You're allowed to turn in the evaluation course.
Oh, are those still out? Or can you still turn those in?
I have no idea.
I know they close pretty soon, if not already.
Oh, okay.
I think they closed already.
No, you don't need to know the percentages for each dilemma. You don't need like BMR versus thermic effective feeding. No, I'm not big on remembering specific numbers unless I think that they're really relevant for you to know. Relative numbers work most of the time, right? Like it doesn't like, I mean, I'm probably gonna get some history person on my butt about this, but like as long as you know that, you know, like the Cold War happened after World War II, right? It's like you don't need to know like the specific time frames unless you're trying to like argue specific events. It's just like specific numbers for the point of knowing specific numbers. I just want you to know relative things, except for where it really makes a point. You know, like understanding that you need 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day and 4,700 milligrams of potassium per day sounds kind of arbitrary, but in the grand scheme of things, more than double the amount of sodium that we need, and we're not getting anywhere close to that, but we're way overdoing our sodium intake. And so I feel like that illustrates just how like crappy we're doing, right? It's kind of like if you hear someone is making, you know, like $100,000 a year, you might be saying like, oh, they're doing pretty well for themselves. And then you hear that they're spending like $300,000 a year on dumb shit, right? Like that. Wow, there goes my not swearing on YouTube. That's okay. You know, it frames things a little bit differently, right? Well, you know, hopefully people won't make it to the end of the video then. All right, that's all the time we have. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me. More than likely, I can get back to your questions and, you know, assignments that you want to turn in that you haven't turned in or resubmit for more points. The closer you get to that actual like Wednesday morning time period, the less likely I am to get back to you in a pretty speedy manner, right? If you turn some stuff in tonight or early tomorrow, I'm much more likely to have the time to look through it and give you feedback so that you can make those last minute adjustments. yeah, because I don't want to just be like suffering this entire week. I know. I'm saying that like you guys aren't suffering from taking multiple units and taking your exams, right? I just want you to know that grading exams is not easy either. So it's definitely not as hard as taking them. But remember, I was there with you not that long ago. All right. I will see y'all on Wednesday. Enjoy the rest of your time studying.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
Of course, y'all too. Have a good one, everyone.